Everyone, this is part 2 of the issues I have with 10th edition, what I want to see changed. First video, if you guys watched it, was about the core, mostly core ideas, things mostly around the core rulebooks or like changes eventually that happened or didn't happen in 10th edition. And these are going to be more specific changes, like say like things potentially like codexes or melee and stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, continue watching. Before we get into the video, please, as normal, like, share, comment, subscribe. Helps a lot. I've been rising since starting a few months ago, and it means a lot that you guys are watching, supporting me. If you need any coaching, please hit me up in the Discord. It's pinned in every video in the description, so just send me a PM, Steve Trimble, on the Discord. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy this video. Thank you. Have a great day. All right, so the next, topic of what I had issues-wise with 10th edition was codexes in general. And I think this is a fairly normal talking point. Overarching, before we get to the specific points, codexes in a lot of ways felt lazy. They had a lot less in them than old codexes, like a detachment compared to a subfaction has half to 1/3 the amount of strats. They don't make world traits and relics anymore, etc., etc. You can't ally in. I think that's a positive. You can't ally in to get other rules, stuff like that. And then a lot of the codexes felt like they were written by a B team, where they gave literally no effort, and you just felt sad getting them. Admech, Tyranids to an extent, but Tyranids are kind of cool at the beginning edition. But we'll say Admech, Custodes, stuff like that. That were agents. All right, so let's get into the specific points. Incredibly parasitic and niche detachments. These are ones I'm talking about where it's parasitic by design. Is something in this context is something is being forced heavily. It is telling you need to do this, and if you don't do this, it doesn't work. It's incredibly strong armed, and just forced gameplay. For instance, Sisters of Silence. Sisters of Silence attachment says you have 3 Sisters units that are all essentially the same, and all your buffs go to them. And you're playing Custodians, you don't want to play Sisters of Silence. Simulation Swarm says you buff Harvesters only, and there's like 4 Harvester data sheets. They buffed them to add more, but on Lost, it's literally like 4, one which was a Ripper Swarm. Or Cybernetica, this was the robot attachment. It got reworked, but this was your Cataphren, Castellan robots gain your army ability, which is the most stupidest attachment in the rule. Why don't you just gain your army ability? And all these strats only work on these units. So it's stuff that's like incredibly saying you need to run these things, and they're incredibly niche, and it just like feels like a complete waste of space. You got a complete waste of space in your codex, and it's just like no one really wanted these. If you wanted to make these type of niche rules, it should have been on not in the codex, or it should not be in codexes that had 4 detachments. So those just led to a lot of just anti-fun. You just like read those rules and you're just like, why does this exist? This sucks. Okay. Point number 2. This one is less, opinionated. I guess they're all opinionated, never mind. But assault-based attachments, think things like Bringers of Flame. A lot of things that gave you army-wide assault, advance and shoot, were almost always broken. Not always, because some armies are just functionally bad. But anytime an army that was playable or good and could run, like good shooting, would take these attachments and spam you with incredibly fast, durable tanks or infantry models and just table you for a million inches away, and you can fire back. Think of things like Mon Contao, which has always been good. The Bringers of Flame, Space Marines, Gladys, and now Blades of Ultramar, when they spam tanks, stuff like that. Those were always led to like a lot of alpha strikey mechanics that were hard to interact with, especially in a lot of the GW boards where they're like, imagine table 2, 3, 4, 5 and 3, kind of 6, where it's like you physically cannot hide from these armies and they just kill you. Like if you play against Monka on table 3 Search and Destroy and you go second, you kind of just lose in a lot of instances. You just will die, and there's like nothing you can do about it. And that's just bad. Back in the day, I say back in the day, like 9th edition, army-wide advance and shoot was not like, it didn't not happen. but it was not just like just a rule you picked. It wasn't just like, this is my sub faction. My sub faction lets me advance and shoot all the time. That wasn't really a thing because it's broken. And yeah, that was not. This was another of the 500 rules that led to like melee armies, dying. Because like if you play, like I said, on an open board against these type of armies, your melee army, there's nothing you can do about it. You just died because you can't kill them for one. You can't kill vehicles. That's how the division was designed. When I say that, I'm being slightly hyperbolic. Like you can't. It's not physically impossible to kill a vehicle. Like opponent puts a rhino, you can't. It's not like impossible to kill, but it takes so much effort to do for the points invested that it's just like hard. Or it is impossible. It's like something like Catan. All right, number 3, strong army of unit choice and attachment. This kind of goes with point 1, but in a more advanced method. The issue with this is like, imagine detachments that are specific. I would take Delve Assault choice. Delve Assault thing. Delve is the Berserker detachment for Votann. Almost all its buffs are based around Berserkers. You have the Big Hunt detachment for Orcs. It is the Beast Nag detachment where all its buffs are around Beast Nagas. The Wraith detachment, Spirit Conclave in Eldar. It is the Wraith detachment and all its buffs. Maybe not all, but almost all its buffs are about Wraiths. You see what I'm getting to? So these attachments that like focus on one specific thing and just put all the rules in one basket. The issue that comes by is, one, it forces you to play X amount of data sheet, even if you don't want to, because if you want any amount of rules, you got to run those data sheets. And 2, badly, when this would happen, it happened a couple times, and a lot of times, is if that is your best detachment, GW is essentially saying you have to run these models. You don't have an option, which is like a complete eats freedom, which is one of the biggest issues with these codexes and the game design of the edition, was like the freedom was almost all taken away. Like an example, like I said, if Delve, imagine if Delve is the best Votann detachment and is one of the best ones, GW is essentially saying you have to play 40 Berserkers. You don't really have an option. And that's just like not fun. That's not cool. I don't like that. I like detachments that are more agnostic, like Gladys, which is like it buffs everything in the army. I like some detachments that are more unique, I can like a Delve, but I don't ever want that type of style of detachment to be the best army you have. And that happened a decent amount in the edition. Like, take Green Tide in Bully Boys. Bully Boys said you have to run war bosses and knobs. Like, luckily it's war bosses, but that's what you had to run. And it was incredibly broken. And that's what people did. If you play Green Tide, if Green Tide was the best, which also was debatably the best, it said you had to run 100 boys, and you had to. You didn't really have an option. That's how the attachments are written. It was very, very forced. It's like GW designed like potentially a list in their head, and they said, here's the attachment with the list, and you got to play this list. Like I said, taking away freedom from the player, which is what I'll say is almost never good. Caveats. Getting rid of allies is good. Army uniqueness is almost all gone. This kind of goes with a lot of things I said. Assault-based armies, like these, a thing like a Bringers of Flame, a thing like the Salamanders detachment, stuff like that. They're not fundamentally different. They play incredibly similar. They designed almost the exact same. A Salamanders, Forge Father Seekers, whatever the old one's called, and Bringers of Flame. Their lists are also very similar. Forge Father Seekers runs a little bit more infantry, but it's like you're taking your 3 to 6 tanks that advance and shoot, and you're running them at the opponent, and you're taking your support units to go with it. Same thing with like melee buff detachments, like something like Liberator's Assault Group, and like Warhorde are not fundamentally that differently designed. They're very samey. So a lot of armies come up to being like, I'm in the advance and shoot army. I'm the teleport shoots gun uppy downy army. I'm the OC 500 sit on a point do nothing army. Like armies have been very condensed into very small sub boxes through a lot of the edition. Like meta wise, we have the incredibly durable tank skew and things like Necrons. Space Marines, you have the advance and shoot tank army. Custodes, you have the durability skew anti-melee army in terms of triple land raider, custodian guard spam. And that is just like a durability skew because the points are cheap. All these armies fit into like very small boxes and there's not a lot of deviation. There's been some interesting ones, like things like take like Deceptors from CSM, but usually if they do something that's slightly interesting, they don't usually give them good rules to go with it. And then you have like the Battle Shock rules, which have been always terrible. Like I said, a lot of the unique detachments and rules were saved for like the meme detachments. Like I said, Deceptors had some cool things. You had Infiltrate Army-wide. That's really cool. You had strats to blow up your opponent's monsters and vehicles. That's cool. But then it came with no actual damage. A little point I'll say is a detachment for me to be good is it needs like unique support stuff. You know, things like, you know, blood surges, uppy downies, advanced charge stuff. And it needs like damaging rules, things like lance, AP, sustained hits. It needs a good combination of both. A detachment cannot just be one or the other, because there's a lot of funny support detachments that have a lot of funny support rules that do no damage. And then you have detachments that just do omega damage and have like very little support rules. It can be run over because they're not, whatever the word, I can't remember what the word is. They're not unique enough. I don't know. But whatever. The point is uniqueness has very flown off. It's very died down a lot. Like I said, Psychic's gone. In 9th edition, the armies were very unique. Even if some of them were very overpowered, but they were incredibly unique. Army abilities were much more unique than they are now, and you had more of them and such like that. And then sub-factions, like I said, brought a lot more to the table than attachments did. All right, and the last point is, I kind of talked about this already, is many codexes had no effort or flavor put in seemingly at all. Like I said, it felt like, I'm not saying this happened, so I don't work for GW. It definitely felt like there was an A and a B team. A team was written by people who like 40K and that you wanted to put fun, maybe overpowered rules and codexes and do a good time. B team felt like they took like an AOS team and said, write 40K codexes. And they're like, we don't even like 40K. We don't have any rules for this. It definitely, and it like consistently was like, you would go A, B, A, B. You would have a cool army and then a completely lame army and then a cool army and then a completely lame army. So you had like custodies into orcs. You had sisters into agents. You had like Dark Angels into whatever cool army has after Dark Angels. I don't know if you guys remember, Dark Angels is one of the worst released codex of the edition. They had to rework like every day sheet in that freaking book. Like, how bad it was. Same thing with like Blood Angels and stuff. Like, but it just felt like that. And then so you have like custodies where you have 4 detachments to begin with, one of which is sisters, one of which is unusable character detachment, one of which is the index, which they like nerfed into oblivion. So you have one detachment that was like technically good, and it used it for one rule, which is a reactive move. And then it also came with custodians losing a lot of the rules baseline, and that wasn't fun. You know, you had Admech, which essentially they deleted their codex and gave them a new one. That's embarrassing. That's honestly embarrassing. They didn't do that. They didn't have to do that in 9th edition. 9th edition had an issue with power creep, and it did. But you didn't have like, you weren't scared your codex was going to release unplayable. Almost every single codex was released good and playable and fun. You know, but they, like I said, they progressively kind of did this, but they didn't do this, which was almost the whole edition, which sucked. And it was not fun. It was not fun. Like seeing you're like, okay, I'm like 3 codexes away. Does that mean I'm B team? And then being proven right when you get ridden just like the biggest piece of crap ever. And I'm also scared because, like I said, we don't know anything about 11th edition yet. But if 11th edition is not indexes, which it looks like it's probably not, then we're stuck with these codexes right now. You would have to play the current custodian codex X amount of months to years until they release a new one, which is just awful. It's awful. And we've just, this is like an issue we've had all edition of like gameplay army specialists or whatever, people that are known for doing something. Like I used to be known for playing custodies. Some amount of my people I know are known for playing like orcs or knights, and just don't or can't play that army because one, it's either unplayably awful and or has no flavor, or both, which is what custodies was for a while, for instance. And that's just not, it's not fun. Like I said, if you had to essentially give an army a a whole new codex in an edition, you failed. You failed. AdMech was a failure. Custodians were a failure that they never fixed, for instance. Such things like that. Like I said, Dark Angels was a complete failure. I don't think you should look at how many things changed for Dark Angels. For instance, they reworked Lionel Johnson like 2 times. They reworked Inner Circle Companions like 2 times. They reworked Deathwing Knights. They reworked every single attachment in the book like 100 times because they were just so bad and stuff like that. And that sucks. That sucks a lot. And that's just so sad. Yeah, so codexes overall were a complete and utter dud this edition. And that sucked. There was obviously a few light paces. Like the Orc players were mostly pleased with their codex until actually the OP ones got nerfed and then they didn't like their codex anymore. Space Marines overall got obviously a lot of, help. Their codex was, though was stat power crept, was, released pretty well. And then, they buffed them to keep them in line. Eldar obviously was written by someone who actually likes playing the game and was, very overpowered, but had a lot of flavor and felt like it was designed well. It wasn't every single codex, but that's also showed like the issues of like you had like an Eldar codex next to like a Custodes codex. You're like, this was not written by the same people. This is not written by the same team. And that sucks. All right. So that is the codex section of the issues I have with 11th edition. And we'll get on to the next section. And then here is the little identifiers of like detachments and codexes that essentially had no effort put into them. No Maiden Vigil. We talked about this with the Sisters of Silence. So that's just Tozen, which is just probably one of the worst statutes ever written. It's about like your warlord gets rules specifically, just your warlord. And if he kills someone, it bounces around, but it bounces around in terrible spots. It like wasn't proofread. Armored Warhost, which like was said this is when Grotmus came out 2 years ago. They're like, these codexes were written with the codex inside. These stats were written with the codex inside. And then this detachability was completely useless when the codex came out. It was like obviously not. And they like, I don't lied or misconstrued it or something, but this was not written with the codex in mind. Like Eldari vehicle models have assault. When you had at will make a model move 2 inches or move D6 plus 1 normal move, which is faster than assaulting. Ugh. All right. The next section is balancing. A big talking point, which is not fully incorrect, of about the game is 10th edition is the most balanced 40K has ever been as an maybe edition. And for an overarching the whole edition, as you take it maybe as like an average itself, they're not completely wrong. But asterisk, caveat, all that jazz. We'll get into it. Index period. Index period was unacceptable. Index period had the best in armies ever been in a modern time. I count modern as like 8th edition onward when they fully like reworked the game. The worst in armies ever been and the best in armies ever been at the exact same time, written by the same group of people and released at the exact same time. The indexes were not balanced. They were not tested, probably even a single time. They probably wrote those codexes in like 1 week and just released them. That's what it felt like. And if there was another answer for that, I don't find that acceptable. If you somehow spent more than a week writing those indexes in playing a single game, I don't even know. Index probably came as close as possible to killing competitive 40K as anything ever has done. One big selling point of 10th edition was there's 2 big talking points. 1, we're going to lower the damage army game-wide. This was a big talking point a lot of times. And 2, we're going to reduce the rerolls. I think that one was more of like someone misspoke or talk out of context and became kind of a meme. I think they meant less reroll auras, which they did. They did reduce less reroll auras. There's not a lot, but it became a big meme because there was way more rerolls in 10th edition than there ever was in 9th edition, by the way. But the damage. So you had the index writers. It definitely felt like A, B, and C team. You had A team writing things like GSC, Eldar, T-Suns, Custodians to an extent, CSM, stuff like that. The teams that just killed anything had all the rules. You had C team writing the average indexes, things like, the Space Marine sub-faction, Space Marines, maybe NIDS, stuff like that. The OK armies like Tau. And then you have the C team. The friggin' they took the AOS writers off the street and had them write an index, and they didn't give two shits. You know, things like Death Guard, Votan, AdMech, the infamous ones. But these were supposedly all written by the same group of people and all balanced on each other and all tested. That just did not happen. They didn't give 1 ounce of shit. They didn't give one shit. And this also came with the first iteration of the secondaries and missions from the reworked 9th edition, which were a lot of them were a shit show. So it came with incredibly overpowered armies, incredibly goofy missions and secondaries, all at the exact same time. And this also comes, you know, index period was a lot of the points I had in the first slide of things like 30-inch deep strikes, but Overwatch a lot of times, but towering, stuff like that, you know, melee being a lot worse. And it just made everything like awful. There is no redeeming aspects of index period. Nothing was good about it. It was just dreadful. It led to a lot of the worst mechanics they've ever made. Like, my opinion, I don't think I have this on a slide, sadly, because like there's so much things that are in my brain about this edition. Is the GSC original army rule, the resurrection, where every time a unit would die, you would roll a dice, and like on a 4 up, you would just put a new one, you would resurrect it into a little token, and you would deep strike it next turn on the token. But if you were battle line, you got +3 to that dice roll. 1 + 3 equals 4, which means you couldn't fail it. So the battle line, which is the only unit they ever freaking ran, would be infinitely reservable, and there's nothing you could do about it. You could do things like you could try and stop the tokens, but there's nothing you could do about it. GSC were also besides for Wraith Knight specifically, the hardest hitting army in shooting, while also being the cheapest, while also having things like Lone Op, Uppy Downy, 3-inch deep strikes and stuff. Oh my god, it was so bad. It was awful. I can't get over how awful Index GSC was. And those guys are still suffering for how overpowered their index was to this day with the Codex. Terrible Codex. I forgot to talk about GSC. There's another one. And yeah, but then, like I said, on the other end, you had like incredibly just degenerate armies like GSC, T-Suns, Knights, Eldar. Then you had things like Death Guard, AdMech, Votan, and stuff. It didn't even feel like people who wrote these codexes even knew how to play 40K. And it was awful. There's nothing you could do about it. It sucked. And like you hear a lot of people, like I talk to people and ask people, I'm like, and then they talk about 40K being so balanced, and I asked them, like, what do you think about the index period? They're like, I didn't play. I played one game and I gave up, which was a very common opinion. So I say, in good faith, if you cannot actively say 10th edition is the most balanced edition ever when index exists. You can consider it a short time. It wasn't. You know, some armies just recently got their codex a couple months ago. Maybe not a couple months ago, maybe like 6 months ago to almost a year ago, but still semi recently. Yeah, the last codex actually came like summer last year, pretty recently. And still say index was the best because, like I said, index had the best in armies ever been in modern 40K. You know, I count modern 40K as like 8th edition onwards. And the worst an army's ever been at the exact same time, written by the same group of people. And I don't think that's acceptable. All right. Number 2, haves and have-nots of the data slates. So if you just look at the data slate currently, you can see some armies have pages and paragraphs of changes and updates of data slates. You know, a lot of those might be nerfs and buffs, but just the aspect of being acknowledged. And some armies have, if you're lucky, a paragraph or nothing. Like custodians have like 4 sentences. Agents, the biggest meme, have 1 entry, which is a nerf to the Codexs. But that's just most armies. Most armies have barely anything. So just like what GW did is they focused on a few armies just to change all the time. So armies like AdMech, armies like Space Marines, Tyrannus to Extent, and Orcs. These are armies they heavily focused on data slates this edition, you know, for rules changes, and most armies got barely anything, which is not fun. There's plenty you can change. Every army has things that can and should be updated in data slate, whether it be a nerf or a buff. But just this complete ignoring of armies This edition is just like unacceptable. And this is also goes the MMFM. Agents is like the biggest easy one to talk about. Everyone talks about agents, but what they did to agents this edition, I've said it, I'm kind of using the same word, is unacceptable. They sold an army to people and scammed them. Because obviously in GW's mind, they don't intend agents to be a real army. They never did, because they have not balanced them. They've gotten almost 0 points changes except nerfs to allies. And like I said, they've gotten one data slate change, which was a nerf to the Codexs, and that's it. They've had no help, nothing. And that just sucks. And like I said, this also applies to my army. Like, you know, as a big custodians guy, we've had one data slate change, which was buffing bikes. That's about it. They didn't buff them enough, because bikes, if you didn't know, were the original bikes were definitely written, or they were told to be written as bad as possible, because bikes were OP in 9th edition. The custodian bike was the only mounted unit in the game that did not get a toughness increase at the beginning of the index. It was still T6 like custodians. They didn't get a wound increase. They were still 4 wounds, like custodian with a shield. Their damage was awful. They were incredibly overpriced, etc. And then they reworked them to higher toughness, higher wounds, better damage, and they're still like awful and been reduced in points a couple times. But that's really about it for data slates for custodians. And like other armies have like nothing. Like most of the sub-faction Space Marines barely have any entries. A Votan barely has anything. Stuff like that. There's just haves and have-nots. And like I said, if you're like a Space Marine player, if you're an AdMech player, if you're like even a Tyranid or an Orc player, you can expect to get stuff changed in data slate a good amount of times. Like I said, I would rather just see things change, period, than just be ignored. Being ignored is not fun. Okay. So third one is kind of a specific issue, but one I have a big issue with. So throughout the edition, they have essentially fully reworked armies. Space Marines, AdMech, Votan expansion. They did Votan, but then they just did it in the Codex and fixed it. Like Tyranids kind of, they've done, if you read the armies with a lot of data slate changes, these armies that just get like fundamentally reworked. And then they would give them incredibly overpowered rules. But the issue is, instead of like fixing the rules and maybe taking some away, trying to fix it, they just increase the points every data slate thing until they're broken. Like Space Marines, for instance, they got +1 to wound oaths a year and a half ago, a little bit less than a year and a half ago. And that, you know, applied to Ultramarines specifically, but it didn't, you know, it did apply to the non-Ultramarine Space Marines, but Ultramarines continue to be the dominant way of playing Space Marines, no matter what, since that change onwards. But the rest of the Space Marines who aren't playing Ultramarines have suffered for it. They keep pointing them into oblivion instead of fixing that rule that they did. Same thing with AdMech. AdMech's more of a new one, because that was like last year that they fixed it, like last summer. They reworked them fully. They had a lot of reworks before. Like they changed like the Ballistari last cannon like 4 times. I think it was 3 times. It was 3 or 4 times. It was insane. You know, and now they're just on the point of nerf the points, nerf the points. They've been nerfed like 3 data slates in a row. Instead of like, okay, maybe we should reduce some of the points. Maybe Rustalker shouldn't have every keyword in the book. Maybe Last Chicken shouldn't have every keyword in the book. Stuff like that. I'm not saying they need to do that, but I'm just making hypotheticals of like, yeah, maybe they can reduce some of the rules. Eldar was a big one, especially in the index time. In the index time, GW would never change rules. So Eldar just got pointed into oblivion for about 9 months until they just could not play the game anymore. Like Warp Spiders started at like 15 points or something. They eventually got up to like 27 points a model. For a T3, or it was 25 or 27 points a model. For like a T3, 3 upsave model with 1 wound. Stuff like that. So instead of like fixing these rules that, you know, a lot of them are easy to identify, there's like, just keep increasing the points until you're like, just playing with bullcrap. Like for instance, Index Blood Angels. Death Company was the best way to play in the army. Obviously, you just ran a bunch of jump pack Death Company and a couple guys in Rhinos. And that was the only play you played the army. The issue was, since Death Company were so overpowered, their points were so high. Eventually, a Death Company jump pack was 28 or 29 points for a tactical Marine. You know, T4 with 2 wounds. And that just, it is not fun spending 30 points on a, you know, tactical Marine. Like, just look at Warp Talons right now. They're 27 points. They're infuriating to play with. And that's just stuff I just do not like. I did not like them doing this, you know, changing an army, making them broken, and just pointing them into the fucking sky, even though it shouldn't be an army that's that expensive. All right, so we just got to this one I talked about before, skew durability metas. This is a big thing that happened a lot. For instance, to make the easiest comparison, we're in one right now, Catan. People aren't probably not going to play Pantheon or WoW anymore. Most likely, people still can. But you have this giant increase of everything. You have high toughness. You have damage modifiers. You have feel no pain. You have a crap ton of wounds. You have also damage to go with it, so you can't be ignored. So you have like Catans. You have like Recon Guard, which is a skew durability meta. You had Bully Boys, as I talked about before. Things like this, which led, and just tank spams in general. Triple Land Raider, for instance, still here. Triple Land Raider was also a skew durability meta in the beginning of the edition. And that's why Redeemers got nerfed so much, because people just kept spamming Redeemers with permanent, because AOC also lasted the whole turn, whole phase, just spamming Redeemers with smoke AOC and being literally invincible. Greater Demons in general. Greater Demons in general are just the skew durability thing. Knights are the biggest one. Knights, when they got changed, their rules were not great, but they were just incredibly undercosted for their points and their durability, that they were broken. And every time this happened has made people completely unhappy with the game. Because this also coincides with GW making vehicles and monsters just disgustingly broken this whole edition. This has been the freaking car edition. It has not been fun. For someone who hates vehicles and monsters, I do not like playing with them. I don't want to. I just want to hit people with my little dudes on foot. That's what I like doing. That is the way I like playing 40K. I don't want to play cars. And it's just not been fun. Like, we'll talk about everything. Like I said, demons, Necrons always. Anytime someone's spamming vehicles, like you can even consider Tau to an extent. All versions of Knights, etc. Orcs, all versions of Horde meta, etc. Horde's a little bit different, but Green Tau was a big one because that was just pure durability. They had 5 of them will save on the whole army. They had the best blood surge ever invented, which was they blood surge. You shot them, you targeted them with shooting tech, and they blood surge before you shot them. That was a rule that existed. I went into this one, but real ones like the OG big design philosophy of 10th edition was we are lowering the damage, making everything lower because people complain about it. Which is, actually the complaining is, I will say, wrong, as if so only half the armies got the idea of we are lowering the damage. We're making the game more durable, more things to deal with, but only half the armies dealt with it. And still, those armies that had to deal with for lowering the damage, still some of them are suffering for it. Things like Tyranids, for instance, is a big one. Space Marines, they had to have +1 to wound added to their Oath of Moon, for God friggin' sakes. That's insanity. I'll have to say, you don't actually like lower damage. If you want lower damage, go play against Triple Redeemer. Like, just in your mind, go look at index time, see Redeemer spam versus half the armies in the game. And people did not like it. It actually was the worst thing ever. Lowering the damage sounds cool in theory until you actually figure out when you can't actually kill anything at all. It's the most anti-fun thing in the world. You need to be able to kill stuff. All right, another one. This is still kind of balancing. This also goes Codexs. Units being nerfed for the best attachment they can be in, making them bad everywhere else. This is a very big thing with Ultramarines. Ultramarines gets all Space Marines nerfed, including, things like Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, which don't even get the +1 to wound oath. Say like Meganoms. Meganoms were nerfed because of Bully Boys and pointed into oblivion, and then they were bad anywhere else. And this goes with the detachment design of very parasitic detachment rules, where it's like, we're a detachment that says you need to run Meganoms. We're a detachment that says you need to run Custodian Wardens, for instance, even though it doesn't exist. We're a detachment you need to run character-led units spam. And then, you run those because the rules are telling you need to do that, and all your rules are relying on them. GW points them into oblivion instead of maybe changing the rules. And then they're bad in every other attachment, just making the game worse off for no reason. This is to put a little add-on is GW has been incredibly apprehensive about changing rules. They've done it much more this edition than any other edition, but it's still not a lot. Like, this goes down to the have-nots, the day slates, and reworked armies being OP and just putting them oblivion instead of like changing rules a lot or reining in rules. They just point things. It's like it shows like the last 2 data slates. Like Eldar got, you know, a big rework of rules to an extent. That was really it. Nothing else got changed to rules. And this attachment, they didn't freaking do anything. This data slate was awful. So yeah, units being nerfed because of specific attachment, making them terrible. Otherwise, it was sad this whole edition because it happened all the time. Internal codex balance. This is very big. Every single army, if you're lucky, has 2, maybe 3 viable attachments out of 6 to 15 in your codex. I think the lowest anyone has is maybe like, I'm not counting the codex space, the non-codex space marines because they have all the space marine ones they can play in. But like pure armies, I think the lowest anyone has is 6. I think that's mostly correct. It might not be exactly, but it's probably close to 6. 5 might be the lowest. But if you're lucky, 2 are like actively playable. 3 if you're really lucky, but usually 1, maybe 2. So most attachments are unplayable, and then they don't change them. Most attachments have never been touched, and they're just awful. And they actually did something, in my opinion, which was terrible, which were they just make new attachments that are reworks of old ones instead of just reworking the old one. The biggest one is Nightmare Hunt being a rework of the old one, or whatever the hell it's called. I don't even remember. Let's actually check real quick. Dread Talon. See, I couldn't even remember. I remember most things. So like Nightmare Hunt, instead of just reworking Dread Talons and making it better and making it playable, they just make a new codex and just leave Dread Talons in the dust for no reason. And then like a lot of times there's like units that are just like awful. Toxicrene, never been playable. They've essentially never touched it. Like Devastators, Tactical Marines, Rhinos, and Space Marines, Razorbacks, essentially fucking awful the whole edition. Land Raider Crusaders, stuff like this. There's just so many units, so much attachments, and these books that are just ignored, completely ignored. GW ignores them. And so, like I said, if you're like lucky, you have 3 playable attachments. Why is that? Like I said, detachments are so niche to begin with. All they have is 4 enhancements and 6 stratagems. They don't have a lot going on. They should be easy to fix. Like I said, sub factions, like say like CSM fuck factions back in the day. CSM sub factions had like 5 to 8, had like 5 relics and warlord trait each, like 10 enhancements, 6 to 12 strats each, plus a detachment rule, plus your baseline rules to go on with it. They are much more complex, and they actually did pretty good job balancing stuff like that. For instance, not perfect. I'm never going to say things are perfect, obviously, but it was much harder to balance those stuff because there's a lot more plates to be spun, and it feels like they did a better job. Here, they just seemingly picked like the X amount of playable ones and just focused on those and completely ignored everything else for the whole edition, which sucks. It's not, it's lame. All right. So here's my little showing. Like, see, you can see Custodes. All they have is Virtus Praetors, and they fixed Auric Champions and Shield Host, kind of. Shield Host was once per game, by the way. They turned an ability that was once per game to passive. That's how bad it was. That's how bad this codex is. Same thing with Auric Champion. Auric Champion was character models. Frick. This is the one I talked about earlier of the character attachment that was non-functional. And then every other change is just Virtus Praetors. Imperial Agents, no changes except a nerf. But Space Marines, 10,000 changes, and this is only half of them. There's a whole nother page. Just the haves and have-nots of the day slates. All right, so that is the Codex section. So we're going to get on to the next section. Oh, one more thing. This is the Custodian. So StatCheck has this. This is the Eldar index win rate from the first 2 patches. So after the very first nerf, where they got a nerf, by the way, the very first nerf. So this is like the first meta. This is like when GW Tacoma was playing at the 90% ELO win rate. So I wanted to find the best players. They had an 80% win rate, 81% win rate. It was 69 for everyone, but 81% win rate for one of the most popular army in the game. If you're just like good at the game, that's insanity. You essentially could not lose. Oh, 94% positive win rate, by the way. Crazy. This is unacceptable. So melee. This is kind of really what I want. This is what made me almost hate this edition. GW purposefully designed melee to make it as bad as it could be. I don't know why they wanted melee to suck this edition, but they just decided to do it. I don't know. So first, melee movement was obliterated for seemingly no reason. Now, as you know, when you play melee, if you charge something, you have to base. If you have to base, if you pile in, if you can get into combo with something, you have to. If you consolidate, if you get into combat with something, you have to. You cannot consolidate if you can't get into combat or get onto an objective. To fight in melee, you need to be base to base of something that's base to base. None of these existed before. Before first fighting 9th edition, you had to be within an inch of someone that was within an inch. No base to base stuff. You did not have to base someone when you charged. You did not have to. You just had to get closer. You got to pile in and consolidate no matter what. If you were charged, you got to do your pile in and consolidate. So you got to do all these movements for free. Not for free, but it was part of the melee. This also came in with melee having more rules and detachments and subfactions. Like you had armies that could double fight. So you could, fight, pile and consolidate, and then fight again, pile and consolidate again, and do more movement that way. Or you had other ways of doing movement. Like you had more things like fallbacking, like Tyranids. For instance, they were notorious. They had a strat, or at the end of the fight phase, they go deep strike or run away, stuff like that. So, but the point was, this was baseline melee. So, and let's skip to the third point. This goes with melee movement. Rolling too high in charge can be bad. This is ridiculous, honestly. One, melee is already more RNG than shooting, because it's random if you're even allowed to fight someone. You can get into combat with a charge, which sucks in of itself, but whatever, that's how it works. But being able to be punished because your opponent, you roll too high in charge because of rogue intervention or other rules, because you have to base. You do not have an option. The option is taken away from you. There's no freedom in melee. Nothing. It has told you how exactly it works. And there's a lot of times where you see someone on stream or you play a game where they roll like a 10, they can't re-roll, and they lose. Because they're like, oh, you're getting heroics by Lion Johnson now. Oh, this sucks. You're like, I think heroic intervention in general is a positive rule, but heroic intervention is a nerf to melee. It just is. That's what it's supposed to be done. Before, heroic intervention was just at the end of the charge phase. If someone's within 3 inches of a character, you can go into combat them. You see this strat a lot on things like Space Wolves and Wrath of Rock, but it's 6 inches. That's where it's from. It's the old heroic intervention rule. That's it. It was not right after you charge me, I got to charge you back fucking 12 inches. Nah, that's not how it worked. So like I said, even though I think heroic intervention is cool and positive, it was just designed to nerf melee. Just like all the stuff, like the melee movement, being need to base, stuff like that. Now, back to number 2, melee damage went down. Melee actively, in most instances to all instances, got the we're doing lower damage this edition. Guns did not. Guns and average did not. Guns and average barely changed. Melee got everything lowered in AP, everything lowered in damage. Thunderhammers used to be damage 3. Power Fist used to be AP 3. Then they added, which is very prevalent in melee weapons, things having baseline weapon skills. This combines with modifiers. So Thunderhammer is now weapon skill 4. They changed it in some of the models because they figured out how awful that is. And that could be modified another way. So Space Marine could be -2 to hit in melee, which was not a thing before. Before, Thunderhammers were just -1 to hit. You hit on 3s, you hit on 4s, it's the worst you get on them. That's how they worked last edition. Like I said before on the tank part, a Thunderhammer / a Power Fist was strength 8 when most tanks in the game were T7. So they win most things in the game on 3s. There's also, movement is damage. It really is. Your damage did not get screwed by movement like it does now. Like I said, you don't need to be base to base to fight someone. It was within an inch of an inch. That's vastly more movement, vastly more able to fight stuff, combined with you being able to move your models how you want to move them and position them, get them onto objective stuff if you need them to. Melee also has barely any attack. Like it has on average more attacks. You want to hear the one fact about melee, that melee range is 1 inch. It's 0 inches. Guns are up to 72 inches. A gun can have 72 inch is times the threat range of a melee weapon. Oh, speaking of melee, sorry, I want to get back to it. In 9th edition and 8th edition, there was a lot of ways to make your charges better. There was things like 3d6 discard lowest or 3d6 period. pluses to charges and stuff everywhere. They were very common. They barely, if any, I don't think there is like any 36 charges anymore. They were very common, those last edition, because, you know, they want a melee to be usable. You know, I'm not saying melee is functionally unusable. It obviously is you can do melee and it can work. But they've done a lot. They've done really a lot of things in the power to make melee you just suck. They've tried really hard. Yeah, so melee just, you know, it can't kill anything. Like you said, we're in a meta right now where if you are a 2 damage melee army, which is every melee army, by the way, that isn't like just trying to spam, you know, hordes of dudes, you can't play into Catans. That doesn't happen for guns. So, like, for instance, guns, like last cannons, do more damage than they did last edition. While equivalently saying about the same strength, because last cannons were strength 9 last edition. Now they're strength 12. You know, obviously toughness is a little higher and stuff like that. But, like, you know, most things cap out at T11. Most things cap out at, you know, if they're lucky, T12. So they win most of the games on 3s or 4s. Before, you know, they win most things on games on 3s. And then sometimes 4s. Like last cannon's strength did barely change. Melta's strength got worse. That is true. But their damage got better. Meltas do way more damage than they did last edition. You know, fire dragons. And other things like that. So, like, you know, you have armies like Tau spamming things like plasma guns and missile pods and stuff and still killing people because guns are much easier to buff. You have, like I said, easy access to assault. That's another thing. There's barely any armies that have like a thing like army-wide advance and charge. There's barely any attachments that do that, if any. Like Eldar's got one, for instance, but it's a very uncommon rule. But army-wide assault is incredibly common. And these are the same rule, by the way. You just can advance and do melee or advance and shoot people. They're not fundamentally different rules. Advance, I'll tell you, assault is a better rule than advance charge, by the way. Because guns have range. Melee does not. Melee could be completely like screened out. Like you could just say, okay, you are outside 24 inches of me. You physically can't touch me. Guns, you're like, my gun is 50 inches and I advance to shoot. And okay, you can shoot me no matter what. So yeah. This is sad. This part is the most sad because, like, I play melee armies and, like I said, there's some armies you can't kill. Like if you play against like guard and you're playing mass power fist army, you're gonna so struggle. It's like sad. All right, number 4, terrain punishing melee. This was the thing in 9th edition. This is not me saying 9th edition is better. This list isn't just saying 9th edition is better. I'm saying these are things that are bad in 10th edition. Terrain in 9th and I'll say GW because that's the American standard. Punishes melee profusively. So terrain that is actively awful for melee is 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is not good for melee. Terrain that is good, can be good for melee is 7 and 8. And 1 is agnostic. 1 is the most basic board. And the point is about 8 and 7 being terrain melee favored is a complete just misnomer. If 8 and 7 were actually pure melee favored, they would not have sight lines going across the whole board. They are the best we have for melee, but saying they're like melee favored is just incorrect. But so we have 5 boards that are actively awful and a detriment for melee. You have 1 decently balanced board and 1 and 2 that you can argue are melee favored. They're not, but I'll say for sake of argument, they are. 7 is more than 8 is, by the way. But so that's a big issue. So melee struggles to get into combat. It struggles to kill you, and it struggles to not die on the way there. These are not issues guns have. Guns don't struggle to get to you. They don't struggle to kill you, and they don't struggle to survive because you're all playing T11 tanks with 2-up saves. Another one. Here's the thing. Like I said, this isn't just me. So before, in the editions before here, you were never allowed to fight things you did not charge. You were not allowed to. So you could not like charge something, pile around it, and fight something else. You could not charge something, double fight, and then fight something else you didn't charge. That wasn't allowed because melee was actually functional and you can actually do things with it. But this edition, since GW made melee so bad, they made movement so awful, they had to keep this actively bad rule in the game, which is you are allowed to fight anything no matter what. If you made a charge rule, you can fight things. So it leads to a lot of feels bad mechanics for newer players and just players in general. You still have people complaining 3 years later. They're like, I didn't know you were able to pile in and fight me. It's like, that's just how the game works. And it sucks. I don't think this rule should exist. It did not exist in any other edition. And it was perfectly serviceable. But since GW made Melee awful on purpose, like this is what I'm talking about. This whole list I have, these were all design philosophies they had. These were not, they didn't screw up. They didn't accidentally make you need to pile into things. It wasn't just like, oops, we wrote that wrong. No, the edition was designed this way on purpose. Like the rules writer and the edition designers wanted this for the edition. These are the points I'm trying to make. Like, these aren't just, I'm not just trying to talk about screw ups. That's why I talked about Index specifically and not just like, oh, I really hate Bringers of Flame. Oh, I really hate Bully Boys, though I talked about Bully Boys. Though I really hate Knights. I tried to bring them up specifically, but Index was its own tag because that was how the edition was designed for the Index. It's different to me. Like them screwing up balance accidentally and a design philosophy and a choice are completely different. This is much worse in my mind. So yeah, so they've had to keep this anti-new player rule in addition the whole edition because Melee sucks. And that sucks. Like, I do feel like bad if I play against a new player at a tournament and they don't fundamentally understand how Melee works, and I get to kill like 2 to 3 units they didn't even feel that were even close to being killed. Eldar does this like professionally because they have a 6-inch pile and consolidate after they charge you. And so they go like, oh, and then just tag something that wasn't even close and they just kill you. You're like, it just feels bad. It really does feel bad. I'm going to say this is a bad rule and it should not exist. And I'm, as someone who plays Melee and benefits from it profusively, what am I going to do? Okay, so and the last point is certain metas exclusively made Melee almost unusable, which has never happened for guns. There's never been a meta where guns were just unusably bad. So durability metas, like we're in one right now. Catan pretty much makes things like Blood Angels, CSM that isn't pact bound guns, stuff like that. Start a lot of orc builds, like generic normal Melee armies, Black Templars, unplayable because you cannot kill Catan. There's nothing you can do about it. You just lose, especially the Deceiver. Advance and shoot metas, as I talked about. If you play on like table 2 or 3 and you play against like these assault armies, especially like when they're at their OP times, and you go second, you could just lose on turn 1, and there's like nothing you can do. Also, this combines with the awful boards as we talked about, like table 2, 3, 4, and 5. If they are so open, you physically can't hide, and there's nothing you can do about it. They're just gonna go 40 inches behind a wall and go boom and kill you, and you're like, okay. While you walk your 5 inches while they use Overwatch on you and you're on movement phase and kill that unit anyways. Or like the durability metas, like things like Bully Boys and like Knights and current Catans and such currently that just essentially said no. Or, benefit to me, Custodians of the beginning edition. Custodians essentially auto beat against any Melee army that is the most durable of durable, like Greater Demons, though they would still kill the Greater Demons with 10 models, 4 reels to wound. Because you would get near the Custodians and you could not charge them because if they were touching objective, they could fight first. That too said, fuck you to Melee, as a lot of things in the edition does. Like fight first, but I didn't even talk about fight first. Fight first is another thing to just nerf Melee. Yeah. So that is the big slide of the problems I had with just the Melee in general of this edition. Let's get to the little pictures. Me showing like, look at these boards. Like you have nowhere to go as Melee. What are you going to do when you try to get to these objectives? You're going to walk out and die? Same thing here. Look at this. Look at this crap. Table 5 is so bad. And then show like, here's a power fist. Can't even kill Rhino. There's my little aids for this slide. All right. So we're getting to the end. So I talked about most of my complaints because I said I didn't talk about everything because then I would have to actually just look back in the past and see like, this shit actually sucked too. So I put a lot of things I could think about the last couple of days in there. I tried to talk them, this is an innately a biased video, but what I was trying to do was try to talk about it as holistically as possible, unbiased as possible, and what I think is just actively harmful for the game, not something I just didn't like. because like, you know, there's a lot of things I just hated that I did not even just like bring up too often. But so this is what I want to see changed. So melee overhauled and reworked. Like we just talked about melee being bad, but there's a lot of things like charge instances. Failing charges should not exist. Like anything lower than like a 5, it just should not be a thing. It's ridiculous. Like for instance, think about Old World. How Old World charges work, for instance, it's your baseline movement plus d6 or 2d6, and then discard one of the dice. So the lowest you can ever roll is like between like a 5 and like a 12. Like, you know, a fast horse is the lowest they can charge is like 13 inches, for instance. So like, you know, these specific inches, they can't fail. So due to melee being innately RNG to do your damage, because you have to get a random roll to even get into combat, it should not have an ability to fail small charges. It should not be a thing. I think 6 should be the lowest you can fail on a charge. So I think anything lower than 6 should just automatically go to a 6. That's my opinion. You know, and then like I said, refixing the movement of not all this dumb pile in and forced basing and all that crap that is just hampered melee into the dirt. Like I said, the ability to your charge being bad because you rolled too high is actually insanity. There isn't anything in shooting where you roll too high that's bad unless you're just trying not to kill a unit, but we're not talking about that. You're like, oh damn, I rolled 10 on my Vindicator shots and I one-shot a unit. That sucks. But oh no, I rolled a 9 on my charge and now you can heroic me with your Primarch. I lost the game. That's a real thing. That's a real issue. And then we have to play around all the time. And then it just sucks. While also playing around things like Overwatch and stuff. Like I said, damage increase. Like a premier melee unit should not struggle to kill like a basic tank. It's ridiculous. All right, so melee overhauled to make it fundamentally useful. This is what I want to change. I hate this. I hate this crap so much. Army-wide assault, like things like buffs or detachments and all that. Detachments are the worst one because they're just permanently things like Monka, though technically only Monka lasts 3 turns. Whatever. But things like Bringers of Flame and stuff, they need to be curtailed. Or in turn, you need to add those as charge rules, like make a lag and other rules have army-wide advance and charge, because like that's not the only rule for Bringers of Flame. They also get strength buffs and stuff. Remember, they have other parts that are attachment. It's like, why is there? In my opinion, this makes no sense. Because to me, I'll say I think assault is a better rule than advanced charge. I might be, you know, wrong, but I think it's a better rule. Especially in like a grand scheme. Why is army-wide advantage charge incredibly niche and not very common? But army-wide assault or at-will assault a million units at once is a completely normal rule in like almost every codex. I don't understand. Rework the terrain and or add more boards. And in turn, delete Dawn of War Steam Engagement. They're awful. They've been awful forever. I don't care that Dawn of War is iconic to people from 30 years ago. It's an unusable deployment zone. It just sucks. And to make Dawn of War even remotely usable, you need like double the terrain as a normal board. That's not going to happen. So on terrain aspects, I'm fine. I'll say I'm fine with full ruins, because ruins is the only thing that works in 40K. And unless they just fundamentally redesign a 40K works, you just need ruins to get a block LOS. But what they need to do is like not have, let me go back. Boards like this. This should not exist. Like I said, even table 8 and 7 are shooting favored. So like you guys need to get off your high horse. This is awful. These are like unusable. They suck. They make X amount of armies in the game just functionally unusable. Like you're like, okay, I'm just gonna play an advanced and shoot army and just kill everyone. Just what am I getting? What do you do about it? Like I said, I'm trying to think of this as not someone who's not just a melee guy, even though that's what I'm known for. That's what I do. That's what I like to play. But I want balanced terrain. Like 1, I think is the best board. Obviously, it's the most balanced board. It's perfectly good in every angle. But they should either, you know, add more terrain or make the terrain more useful. Because like, look at here. This is doing nothing here. These should be spun around. These could be like here and here blocking LOS. These could be spun around blocking LOS in tighter corners. Like you do the WTC things and making ruins touch the board edges, stuff like that. So either adding more terrain to the boards or reworking substantially to cut almost all these long range angles, or just adding more boards. Like what they should do is have like right now, like I said, they have so unbiased as possible 5 shooting boards, 2 melee boards, 1 combined arms board. They should have like, you know, say hypothetically, let's go to 12 boards. It should be 4 of each. 4 shooting boards, 4 melee boards, 4 combined arms boards, or like 6 shooting boards, 6 melee boards, 2 combined arms boards, something like that. Whatever the number is. But just the way they're doing it now is not working. And I thought, like, I don't know, the earlier board sets might have been better. I think right now this is like the worst they've done. Because before we had like the Thunderdome in the very first set that was like potentially super melee favorite, but that shit was hype. Vehicle degradation unironically needs to come back. You don't need to nerf vehicles with their toughness. Vehicles can be higher toughness in general, but they can't be, I am at 1 wound, I am shooting a stealth target, I'm in combat, and I'm hitting on a 3. That's ridiculous. It's stupid. Because vehicles, they get to shoot in combat. They already get that benefit. Infantry, monster, infantry, beast, mounted don't get that benefit. So there needs to be something. At minimum, the degradation thing that still exists should be a ballistic skill, weapon skill modifier. So you can't just also ignore a normal modifier. Or they need to bring a full chart back, which is probably not going to happen because that requires a full rework of data sheets. But reworking the degradation thing that exists right now is incredibly easy. You just like, boom, change it to ballistic skill, weapon skill modifier, not -1 hit. They need to do something. As I said, an infantry squad that's lost 90% of those wounds has a lot. That's also one thing people don't understand about vehicles. Vehicles don't lose any value when you lose wounds. A Space Marine, every time you lose an infantry model, mounted model, every 2 to 4 wounds you lose is 20% of your damage just gone. It's get out of here. That's why like Havocs are garbage. Havocs are about the same price as a Predator. A Predator doesn't lose a gun every time you lose 2 wounds. A Havoc, every time you lose 2 wounds, a gun just gets deleted. While also Havocs being half the toughness, 5 to 10. All right, this one. You know, this kind of goes against my points of Codexs not being unique and armies being samey. But this is just a balancing feature. Every army should have a way to gain +1 CP every turn and or free strat easy. There should not be gives and takes. There should not be halves and half-nots. It should not be a balancing feature. It's not a fun balancing feature. Just like how fixed secondaries were not a fun balancing feature in 9th edition, even though they used them as it. It's not. This should be something every army should have. And we don't have this issue of like, oh my god, everyone hates Calgar and Ghoulman. We won't have to complain about it because it won't exist. Continued. They need to add generic strats to each faction. Not a lot. You know, we don't need 30 strats again that are only 3 are useful, but between 2 and 4 to every faction. You know, Space Marines already kind of have it where AOC in every attachment but the newest ones eats one of your 6 things automatically just existing. That should be a generic strat. And then like rules that are fundamental to the army, like maybe, you know, fight on death for orcs, or maybe put something in the wall for orcs, something that's fundamental. Custodians, whatever, they don't have any rules, so they don't actually think of some for them. Stuff like that, stuff that's like fundamental to the army should be a generic thing that every attachment has. And that also helps a lot of the shittier attachments, because a lot of times you're like, why would I ever play X attachment when Gladys has my best strat in my book? Talons of the Emperor, for instance. It's like, it's hard to play a different Custodians attachment because you have one of the best reactive moves in the game. So it's like, sucks. So yeah. Anti-LS needs to be changed to be pure support. I'm probably just wishing down a well, but these are my wishes for next edition. So whatever. This is what I'm wishing for. Anytime anti-LS has been able to do damage in every edition, it has been the most anti-fun thing ever. And anyone that isn't just like loves anti-LS can agree to that. It's like planes, which GW mostly figured out this edition. They tried really hard to make planes bad and mostly succeeded. There's only been a very few times where planes have been somewhat meta. And the times where they were meta, they were used as hover vehicles, so they weren't even planes. Which is good. Planes are awful. And I'm glad they're mostly bad. Anti-LS needs to be the same way. they either need to essentially nerf all the damage to essentially non-exist. Like every Intel's gun should have like no AP, low strength, 1 damage, or even no damage, and just give you debuffs. Like they should be a debuff buff support. They should like shoot like ignores cover plus 1 AP at people. Think of like the mortar on a GSC vehicle. That's a good anti-LS tech. They should use shoot -1 hit at people. They should use shoot, you know, the movement debuff, things like this. Those are all good rules for anti-LS, and then they can be not costed 1,000 points when they don't just table you behind a wall. Since we are most likely staying out of indexes, rework these attachments. Like I said, there's been these last couple days slates have been incredibly lazy. This game does not get updated often. We are not playing an online MOBA that gets an update every week. It's not asking a lot to rework detachments that have been essentially ignored for 3 years. And since we're most likely not getting indexes, you don't need to write 1,000 rules for every army. Reworking all the bad detachments in the time when 11th edition comes out, it's kind of just part of the we're updating to a new edition. Here's a bunch of new rules since you don't need to do indexes. I don't even think this is even a big axe, because like this is just a lot of rules that like, and it's easier to update and fix a detachment than make a new one. You're like, I have a bunch of rules anyways. I just need to rework them and redesign them. Okay, I'm not a designer, so I don't know exactly. Maybe it is actually harder to rework a faction and attachment. I'm not, you know, they know more. But in my mind, what I think it should be substantially easier, because you already have a fundamental, you know, a layout, a skeleton already there telling you this is what this is trying to do, and we could just do a lot of changes to make them better. And I'm not saying they all need to be tier 1 or even like amazing. Just like I said, the Raptor attachment, the OG Nightmare Hunt's right there, and there is nothing positive in that attachment. There's a lot of things. Okay, things I changed. I'll get to the point with the things I liked. Leaders are good. I like leaders. I think leaders is a great system, and I want to stay. I hated single characters of 9th edition. It was awful. It was a bad system. 8th edition was way worse. But there should be more models with auras or non-leader exclusive abilities, because auras are very niche. It's usually saved for a very few units. And but Hurin right now got one, for instance. That's one I like. You know, he has a pseudo leader ability and an aura ability. I think more characters should have some amount of auras. Like, you know, 9th edition was quote unquote plagued by auras. If you dislike auras, I don't care, but whatever. Some people hate them. 10th edition has almost none. We can bring some of those back. Actions were a big thing in 9th edition. Were very curtailed in 10th edition, but relatively popular in the index time, and now barely exist. We have one mission that does actions, and there's like 4 secondaries that does actions. That's it. 9th edition, you had armies that had actions as rules inside their codexes, like do an action to do X, do an action to do X, blah, 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 blah. Lots of secondaries for doing actions, lots of missions required actions. And we had that in 10th edition. They've just, actions have gone like this. Woo! They barely have any. Actions are a good system, or a good balancing feature of you want a cheaper action monkey, as people have called them, to do actions. That also, you know, why spam still exists, because you don't, actions are essentially completely ignorable nowadays, and they shouldn't be. All right. And finally, what I want to see change, the last thing, spam needs to be curtailed. Whatever they do, I don't know the perfect thing. Before, you know, force orgs existed, and that essentially solved it. Force orgs were how detachments, they were called detachments, all they did gauge CP, worked. It was, you can only have X amount of a unit type in each detachment. So say like heavy support, that's where most of the tanks would come. Most attachment only allow you run 2 or 3. So you only run 3 tanks in an attachment, instead of your army could be 20 tanks as they are now. That instantly curtailed it. Or like you could only have X amount of characters, and you had to have X amount of troops or battle line. So whatever they do to curtail the spam, whatever it is, they need to do it, but we should not have the time of someone playing an advanced shoot army and taking 500 tanks. That is the worst. Or, you know, currently right now with all the Catan and stuff. And then finally, this one is kind of a pet peeve of mine. They really should just make it, because they already have it all planned out. They always do at the beginning of the edition. Have a timeline saying, here's the edition. We are planning, you know, things can change. All the codexes in this order. because the issue, especially now, as we're going to see, it's not index time, so it was indexes was much easier to deal with. Now, and when we're going into, because this happened in 9th edition, we already know what happens if you're stuck with an old edition codex. It sucks, by the way. It's awful, because your army just is garbage. Is if you're stuck with an old codex and you're just in limbo for 2 years, you're just not gonna have fun. Like, for instance, you know, Custodes were one of the later codexes in 9th edition, and we were stuck playing. We were stuck playing the 8th edition codex for a couple years, and it was very power crept into oblivion, and it was awful. And that's what's going to happen next edition. That's what's going to happen if they don't do indexes, which they're most likely not doing. Is, you know, a Tyranid player, especially a Tyranid player, is going to be stuck with an awful codex for X amount more years. So, and being in limbo makes it even worse. You're like, I don't even know when I'm getting a codex. In my opinion, they should just have the timeline saying, here's pretty much every codex. You know, there might be little blank spots saying, oh, there might be a new update here. Whatever. I don't know. They're trying to hide something. But it's like, you should know, as like, say, a Custodes player or Tyranid player that's had their codex for 3 years, like, okay, I'm going to get updated in 6 months. I'm going to get updated in a year, and you can plan for that. So it's not just this awful limbo time and you're just sad. All right. So those are the, in my opinion, a lot of the important changes that I said, and a lot of these like things I said potentially that were awful in 10th edition, in my opinion, that I didn't put on this slide, obviously coincide, and I think this should be changed. But I just want to put this slide saying this is what it should be updated. All right. All right. And here I want to put a positive spin. See, this has been a negative video. I've had, you know, some strong words and some negativity, but I've tried to keep it as productive and like critical as possible, to not just say I hate GW, because I don't hate GW. Obviously, I'm playing their game. I love, you know, maybe I don't love GW, but I love 40K, and that's why I'm making this. If I didn't care about 40K, I want to make this video. So first, leaders. I think leaders is a great system. I think it's awesome. It's fun. It's flavorful, and it's cool having a big giant squad of death. I like big squads. I hate MSU. MSU is my least favorite way to play 40K. I like big. That's why I played 30 Custodian Guard, for instance. I played 60 to 70 10-man Plague Marines, or 60, 70 models and 10-mans last edition. I love it. It's my favorite. I like big squads. But leaders are cool because you can make big squads and make them even better. I hate solo characters. I don't like it. It's whatever. I don't like playing with them. So 9th edition, that's how it worked. Leaders, good. Cool. Keywords, core abilities. This is just a positive change, adding things like keyword deep strike, keyword like feel no pain, blah, 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 blah. That's a positive change, because before it was all just written on one day sheet. It was boring, it was repeated, and people had flavorful deep strikes. So it's like, why? It's like Tyranids had Burrow Strike, Space Marines had Deep Strike. It's like, they're the same ability. Why are they written differently? That was dumb. But now they're all the same, and that's easy. But there's still more needed. So like Blood Surge, every single person that has a Blood Surge is written on their ability, and it just is a Blood Surge. Let me put this up here. And that can be changed. Obviously, some are D6, some are D6 plus 2. You can just say Blood Surge D6, Blood Surge D6 plus 2, Blood Surge flat 6. Very easy. And then you should not have like the slightly different Blood Surge for no reason. Like, some Blood Surge require being hit, some require taking damage, some require losing a model. They should all just be take damage, or whatever it is they decide. And that's also like more extra information you have to know for no reason. Like the Hurin's Blood Surge, the Carnivix Blood Surge, Berserker Blood Surge are all fundamentally different slightly for no reason. Mission structure in general. Like, this doesn't do with the balance of the missions, but how they design primary versus secondary versus like the extra stuff at the end was very good in my mind. I quite liked overarching, unbiasedly ignoring the balance of the emissions, how it's like looked at. Obviously 4 is normal. There is more balancing in 10th edition than other editions. It just factually is. That's good. Maybe there should still be more. Like I said, there's a downstate every 3 months. That's still not a lot. Like, sure, you know, maybe like people like the more casual people dislike the amount of changes. I can understand that. But at the same time, you can just ignore changes. It doesn't affect you if you don't want it to be. This is not like an online game where it's forced onto you. So that's fine. That's why I don't think it's that important. Centerpieces being good. Centerpieces weren't like terrible like in other editions, but a lot of times they're quite feast of famines. Like Primarchs were usually bad, or Butte Gulman was sometimes good. A lot of centerpieces were just not worth the snuff. This also came, I didn't bring this up, but like customization went down a lot, which has a lot of positive, a lot of negatives. Before, epic heroes were mostly not very useful because you could make a generic character just as good, if not better, in most instances, which is, you know, in a lot of ways, both positive and negative. So I didn't really want to bring it up because I'm mixed on it. I'm not like, I don't have the biggest opinion on being able to customize stuff like specific characters versus I hate epic heroes. I don't. I think that's a weird thing to care about. But centerpieces in general in every army has been or is good. I don't think there's ever been a single time in the whole edition where an army centerpiece model is just been bad. Actually, let's go over it. I'm kind of curious. All right, Eldar. Both the Avatar and Kane and Yvrain, or the Incarn, were both amazing at certain points of this edition. Drukhari doesn't have one. Chaos Demons, that they only play centerpiece models. Chaos Knights, centerpiece army. Chaos Space Marines, Abaddon has been was very amazing at being an edition. He's kind of waxed and waned. He was obviously way cooler in 9th edition. It's probably the coolest model ever made was 9th edition Abaddon. But Abaddon was good. Death Guard Mortarion was both mandatory in the index in a lot of ways and is just playably good. Fulgrim, there we go. Fulgrim's unplayable. There's one. T-Sons, okay, they've had the most mandatory centerpiece model. World Eaters, Angron was overpowered in the index, and now he's just okay. So there's one. GC doesn't have one. Sisters, Morven Vol is the most used model in Sisters this whole edition, though the Triumph has just been decent in this edition. It's not like amazing. It was way better last edition. Custodes, Trajan, they don't really have one. Trajan, what you could say, he was okay in the index, and he's bad now. So maybe Call was bad, and now he's amazing. So there you go. Agents don't have one. Guard, I don't know what you would consider a centerpiece. It would be either a Baneblade, a Rogodorn, or Leontis. Leontis, not really. He's kind of small. So Baneblades are bad, though they're better this edition than older editions. And then Dorns have been amazing all edition. Helbricht has been decently good all edition. Dante, like, I'm kind of reaching, but Dante's always been good. Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson took 5 reworks, but he's now finally decently good. Deathwatch doesn't have one. Grey Knights doesn't have one. That's not a real army. Imperial Knights, Canis, everyone knows Canis. He's been quite good this edition. These armies aren't real. Space Marines, Rabute Gluman has been essentially very uppy downy, but he's never been bad, and he's always been either good or overpowered. Space Wolves, what's his face is like adequate. He's not like impressive or amazing, but he's good. Their Chapter Master guy. Votan doesn't have one. Necron's the Silent King has been good all edition. Orcs, Gazcool has been uppy downy, and now he's mandatory, so he's good now. Tau, I don't know, is the Twin Lance their centerpiece? I don't know what we consider the centerpiece for that model, that army. So the Twin Lance is good. And Tyranids, the Swarm Lord, has been quite good. He's not or the Norns, I guess they're like the new centerpiece. They're good, at least the Norm Emissary. So overall, centerpieces in general have been mostly good to OP. So I like that. Centerpieces should be good. Like, it wasn't fun last edition worrying about Angron, Magnus, Mortarion dying because they couldn't be obscured, and that wasn't fun. Even though I played Mortarion, though, was really fucking good, and like rules wise in 9th edition, holy crap. He was like the highest single damaging model in the game. He killed the shit out of anything except Abaddon. I think Abaddon was the highest damaging model, period. No game-wide allies. Allies is a terrible system. It ruined, like, it made competitive awful. I'm glad it's gone. Flavor is whatever. Some flavor needs to go away for gameplay, like Custodes not being invincible, for instance. That's fine. Allies should not come back. I don't even think the current ally system should exist. I think we still have too much. Like, Chaos Xenos don't get allies, but Imperium can take knights and anything from agents, and Chaos can take any demons they want, and then CSM can take 4 specific day sheets. It's like, the most nothing burger it's ever been, but it still maybe shouldn't even exist, period. GW making real events this edition. They had, some in 9th edition, I'm pretty sure. A couple. They really took it off in 10th edition. And the player-place terrain being deleted because they made their own terrain formats. Thank God. A player terrain was a Scourge, How it worked is if you rolled off to, you literally placed terrain 1-on-1. You each got half the board and you placed them. And how it worked, and you had your terrain had to be X amount of inches from each other. You can't just like stack all your terrain in a wall. It'd be like 6 or 12 or whatever it was. And how it worked is if you were a gun army and you rolled off to go first, you put like a crate or like a forest that did block else in the middle board, and you said, "Fuck you, I'm gonna table you in turn 1." You're like, this sucks. Next, the baseline way of how CP is handled. This is the best it's ever been. Before, the last 2 editions is you just gain a shit ton of CP at the beginning of the game, and you can spend it willy-nilly until you run out, and you get a very few way of gaining CP back and stuff. Now it's everyone gains 1 CP every turn or every battle round, or it's now every turn. And maybe it used to be every battle round. They changed every turn. I don't remember. I think that's what it was at the end of 9th edition when they finally changed it. And then you get 1 turn, and you gain like 1 extra turn. So it's very simple. They don't need to make strats that cost 3 CP. They shouldn't have any strats that cost 2 CP, except like very, very niche ones, but they still kind of do. But there's barely any 2 CP strats. It's mostly just 1 CP strats. It makes things easy. You don't have to worry about like, do I need like 12 CP this turn? Because things you got to think about. Like sometimes when I played Tyranids, I could spend like 7 CP in 1 turn. Ridiculous. And the game did get simplified, but not simple at all, which is good. There was a big talking point, and that's kind of like a, ooh, this is a scary thing to say. You're going to make this game like for consoles, you know, quote unquote. That's like PC players like to say, consolified. And they didn't do that. They took a lot of frivolous stuff out, like, you know, the psychic phase, a 10 billion strat, many archaic rules. And the game is still quite competitive. Like, you know, if it was just incredibly simple and, you know, there was not really any skill involved, the people who win all the events wouldn't win all the events. The game does have a crap ton of skill involved. But that's good. So I appreciate that, because, you know, besides the reason I said I disliked it, the more simplified nature in general is a positive, especially things like list writing and stuff. Overall, there you go. This is I'm gonna keep this one video, like whatever. You're gonna see that. That is all my thoughts of 10th edition. Not all of them, but the ones I could really think of at the time. What I want to see adapted for 11th edition, and the things I liked. Like I said, I got this question a few times of my thoughts of the edition, because I've expressed potentially I'm not the biggest fan of 10th edition, which I'm not. But yeah, I hope this was could give you some introspective. This was like, you know, somewhat enlightening to people. Hope you enjoyed my little thoughts. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you for watching.